begin with a prayer for generosity. You can find it on the front of your handout. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Lord, teach me to be generous. Teach me to serve you as you deserve, to give and not to count the cost, to fight and not to heed the wounds, to toil and not to seek for rest, to labor and to ask for no reward, save that of knowing that I do your will. Amen. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. So, welcome to day 1 of 3 of our summer seminar on the North American Martyrs. So just a little bit of a big picture background on this before we get into today's topic. So as some of you know, or will have known from the flyers, Holy Martyrs Church in Falmouth is named, the full name is the Holy Martyrs of North America. Our church has the distinction of being the first church in the United States dedicated to the North American Martyrs. Unfortunately, I think because we usually truncate the name, a good chunk of our parishioners have no idea which martyrs these refer to and why they're important and why they're special. The Holy Martyrs of North America were 8 Jesuits who in the 17th century left France and went to preach particularly to the Huron tribe in what's now Ontario in Canada. 5 of them died among the Hurons. Those were Father John de Brebeuf, Father Gabriel Lallemont, Father Charles Garnier, Father Noel Chabanel, and Father Antoine Daniel. 3 of those 8 died in what's now upstate New York, in what was then Oster-Nanon, and which is now Voorheesville, New York. Those were Father Isaac Jogues, and then Rene Goupil, who was a layman who was received into the Jesuits by Isaac Jogues while they were in captivity. And then a young man, aged 22, I believe, John de Lalande, was accompanying Isaac Jogues. Over the course of this week, we're going to go through, first, the story behind the mission to the Hurons through the sort of focal point of John de Brebeuf, who was the founder of the mission. Then tomorrow we'll focus in on St. Isaac Jogues, who is of course noteworthy for us because he was the one to die in upstate New York along with Rene Goupil and John Lalande. And then Wednesday we're going to fast forward about 75 years to Father Sebastian Râle, who conducted a mission to the Abenaki of Maine and died laboring for the salvation of their souls in 1724 in what is now Madison, Maine. So that's kind of the plan for the week. Now, a note on sources. How do we know all this stuff about 17th century Jesuits? Well, fun fact, we actually know quite a bit. The Jesuits, when they were in the missions, wrote letters, particularly letters back to their superiors. So the letters would get sent on a ship to France. The superiors in France would read them, and then they would publish them. These publications were known as the Jesuit Relations. They would publish one annually. Many people in France would read these relations. They were a great way of generating interest in the missions, both for vocations, also for people to volunteer to help work in the missions, and for fundraising. Over the course of the roughly 100 more years that the mission in New France continued, we have all these letters collected about what exactly was going on day by day, week by week in these missions. And they're written by the missionaries themselves. This gives us an unusually clear historical look as to the dynamics these missionaries were facing. We know exactly what they were thinking. We know exactly what they were enduring. We know exactly what people were saying about them and to them. We have witness testimonies from the natives themselves, some of those who converted, some of those who did not. So you can actually find the primary sources for everything we're going to talk about here on one convenient website that's hosted by Creighton University. So if you look in the front of your handout and see there's a URL there, if you go to that URL, type it into your URL bar, it will take you to the online collection of all of the letters that are referred to today. There are in total 80 volumes, so it can take a little sifting through. But you can find about anything you would ever want to know about Jesuit missionaries in New France between 1613 and 1750. It's all available to you. With that, let's begin. So first, a little background on the missions in New France. The Jesuits had actually an early role in preaching to the Native Americans back as early as 1609. There were two Jesuits whose names were Father Pierre Biard and Father Edmund Massey, who went to what's now Nova Scotia in Port Royal, which is now Annapolis. Their job was to preach to the local Native Americans there. The problem was that the colony of Port Royal at the time was run by French Huguenots, Protestants, who weren't particularly interested in then having access to the Native Americans, learning the language and being able to preach to them. And so, frustrated with the whole business, Father Massey and Father Biard had a ship built, and they intended to sail to what is now Castine, Maine, to establish an independent mission colony there so that they could start to actually meet the natives, learn their language, and start teaching them the faith. Now, as divine providence would have it, they were caught in a storm, blown off course, and they landed instead in what is now Southwest Harbor in Mount Desert Island. When they arrived, they actually happened to know some of the natives who were there. They had met them in the course of trading and in their travels. And they were having a debate as to whether or not to continue on to Castine or to just stay in Southwest Harbor. And in that moment, they heard a wail go up. A woman was crying. And it was because her baby had just died. And she was holding the child in her arms. And the natives encouraged Father Biard, you have to go baptize the baby. What if it's still living? It needs baptism. So Father Biard runs over, he baptizes the child, and miraculously the child comes back to life and recovers. So this, in the eyes of the natives and in the eyes of the Jesuits, was a good sign that perhaps they should stay in Southwest Harbor. So they proceed to establish a colony there. They start a mission. They dedicate it to the Holy Redeemer. So this is why the church in Bar Harbor is this Holy Redeemer Church. And it lasts a few months. A few months in, one of the natives is out walking on the shore and he sees a ship with white people on it. And he goes and he greets the white people and he informs them that your brothers will be so happy to see you. They've established a settlement here. I'll go bring you over and introduce you. And of course, the reply from these white people on the ship were, our brothers. We're so happy. We'll be so happy to see them. Please give them our regards. Now, very soon, this said ship was barreling down upon the mission with cannons blazing because it was not, in fact, a French ship, but an English one. And Captain Samuel Argyle had, been lost out to sea, was very hungry, and all for plundering the colony. So, the French colony wasn't really ready to put up much of a defense. Brother Gilbert Dutet did make an attempt. He tried to fire a cannon, but I suppose when you're a religious brother, you're not expected to be also competent at these things. It misfired and it killed him, and that was the end of the defense of the mission colony. So they're all taken captive. Father Biard and Father Massey are accused by Captain Samuel Argyle of piracy, and Father Biard is taken prisoner. Father Massey and his company are set afloat to go figure things out as they may. They do make it back to France. Father Biard, meanwhile, is dragged down to Virginia, where he is tried by the governor there and almost hung. Instead, he's brought back up to what's now Annapolis, what was then Port Royal. Forced to reveal the location of the colony in Port Royal, the English proceed to level it. And then when he gets back to France, he has some explaining to do. So, for this reason, between 1613 and 1625, the Jesuits had nothing to do with the missions in New France. Instead, in those years, the Franciscan Recollects were in charge of preaching to the natives. And they weren't focused on preaching in Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and Maine, because those colonies had been destroyed by the English. Instead, they were focused on Quebec. Now, the problem with having Franciscan missionaries is Franciscans are by design poor. They live on alms, and they were finding that it was difficult for them to get the necessary resources they needed in order to continue the mission. So, in conversation with the Jesuits, one of the Recollects expressed that it would be useful if they had some extra help. Now, meanwhile, the leadership of the company that governed all of Francis's possessions in what's now New France and Canada, the Montmorency Company, was taken over by a Catholic. And so with the Protestant leadership gone, now there was somebody interested in actually seeing that the natives were preached to. And so he requested that the Jesuits be sent to go and assist the Franciscan Recollects in their labors in New France. There were 3 Jesuits sent for this purpose: Father Jean de Brebeuf, Father Charles Lalemant, and our good friend that we were just talking about a moment ago, Father Edmund Massey. Now, the choice of Brebeuf was somewhat odd. Brebeuf entered the Society of Jesus in 1617, took vows in 1619, but almost immediately became deathly ill. If you look at the dates in which Brebeuf was ordained, he was ordained subdeacon, deacon, and priest all within 6 months after having been professed for all of 2.5 years. What had happened is he had gotten so sick that his superiors decided that it would be better if he at least got ordained before he died. So he wasn't expected to live. But by 1623, he had recovered a fair amount, was able to take on a regular assignment as treasurer at the college at Rennes. And by 1624, 1625, he was requesting to be sent as a missionary to New France. He didn't expect it, yes. After all, his health had been notoriously precarious. But they saw something in him that they thought worth gambling on. And so he was sent. Now, the 3 Jesuits arrived in what is now Quebec, summer of 1625. They meet with the Recollect Franciscans there. They're apprised of the situation. Basically, what was happening, the Franciscan Recollects had been trying to preach to the local Algonquin and Montagnais tribes. The difficulty they were having is that the Algonquin and Montagnais were nomadic, and therefore they were difficult to establish a rapport with. If you never knew where they were going to be and when they were going to be there, it's kind of hard to get to know people, and it's kind of hard to get to know the language. However, in 1623, they had spent the winter with a tribe further out west by the name of the Huron. The Huron called themselves Wendat. Huron was actually a French nickname for them based on their haircut. They had more hopes for the conversion of the Huron than they did for the Algonquin and Montagnais. The Huron showed more signs of having a more developed civilization. They grew crops and farms. They weren't purely nomadic. They were also very, very prominent among the tribes of the St. Lawrence River and the Great Lakes. They were powerful. And they were friendly to the French. When Champlain was exploring, he had chosen to ally himself with the Huron against the Iroquois and fought with them against the Iroquois. So they liked the French. All of it looked promising. Now, every summer, the Huron would take their birch bark canoes from their home, which is way out west on Lake Huron, travel up the Ottawa River to the St. Lawrence to what is now called the Three Rivers, to trade with the French. Any opportunity that a missionary would have to go and live with the Huron required that they, establish a favorable rapport during these trading trips at Three Rivers. The goal was to convince one of the Huron canoes to take them in their canoe with them and back to their home. Now, they didn't have to do the persuading on their own. Samuel de Champlain was very interested in them taking these Jesuits as well. Of course, he was concerned for the salvation of their souls, but he was also concerned for building a better friendship between the Huron and the French. And there was no better way of doing that than sending these missionaries out to live with them, to learn their language, to live like them, and of course to bring them graces. Now, the first attempts to go with the Huron out to Lake Huron failed in 1625. The reason was this. When the Huron arrived, they were supposed to have a Franciscan and a newly converted Huron with them. And neither showed up. And when neither showed up, the Hurons started getting a little sheepish. And it became pretty clear that there were Huron among them who didn't like the French, who had murdered them along the way. Now, native diplomatic custom required that no one acknowledge that openly, but it was enough for the Huron to decide that they could not account for the safety of the French if they took them in their canoes that year and say, perhaps next year, maybe next year. So for that whole year, Brebeuf spends his time in the kind of surrounding region of Quebec. He's anxious to get to know the natives and to learn the language. So what he does is in October, he goes and starts living with the Montagnier. This sacrifices a lot of comforts for him. Not that his cabin in Quebec was anything luxurious, but living with the Montagnier meant for the whole winter living in kind of makeshift cabins that they would put up and take down depending on where the hunt took them. Being cold, being frequently hungry depending on how the hunt was going, eating cuisine that was a little more simple and not always to the French appetite, shall we say. And also enduring the ups and downs of just building trust with people that you haven't met before. The Montagnier was somewhat cold to him initially, but warmed up to him over time. So, over the winter, he gets some language skills under his belt, knows how Native American idiom works, has some basic sense of their customs and their rituals, comes back to Quebec, and then by the summer, he's ready to make another attempt to go out with the Huron. This time it works, but it's not easy. Brebeuf was a very large man. His nickname among the Huron was Échon, which meant ox. And for this reason, when Brebeuf went to get in one of those birch bark canoes, many of the Hurons said, no, we're not taking all that. So he had to barter heavily. The little Franciscan had no problems at all, but Brebeuf actually was required to give his weight and his height and presence to the Huron for them to take him. Now, French presence was very valuable to the Hurons, so they were happy to have them. But anyway, so that's how Brebeuf got access to the Hurons to begin with. The trip there was not for the faint of heart. You see on page 3, there's some descriptions by Brebeuf of what this trip is like. It's a 3 or 4 week trip. Again, you go all the way down the St. Lawrence to where it meets the Ottawa River, continue through the Ottawa River, past several cascades, waterfalls, portages, etc., to Lake Nipissing. And then finally through a few more streams where you dump out in Lake Huron and Georgian Bay, and then down into the land of Huron. The policy among the Huron and most Native Americans was that in a trip like this, if you couldn't make it, you were left behind. You weren't going to drag down the rest of the company. So in order to survive, Brebeuf in the beginning had to be very careful that he sat on his haunches in the canoe, didn't move, didn't twitch, made no trouble whatsoever, and no noise. It required a lot of patience on his part. Now in time, they decided that it was worth having him paddle. And they warmed up to him a little when they discovered that this great big Frenchman could paddle very well. But he had to make sure not to let up. Again, any excuse to leave them behind, they were likely to take. So finally, after 3 or 4 weeks of this, they arrived in Huronia. Now, as you can imagine, life among the Hurons is not like life in Paris. A few things to note. So first of all, it's kind of like permanent camping. So there's no getting away from bugs. If you're trying to get away from bugs, you have to go into a smoky cabin and just sit with the smoke. There are a lot of other people sitting in said smoky cabin who haven't showered for weeks. And so if you want to get away from the bugs, there's a lot of smell that you have to endure. Clothes are not really a thing among the Huron. At best, sometimes the men bother with a loincloth, but not always. The women bother a little more, but not a lot. So there's some awkwardness around modesty. But further, prior to Christianity, it was a very promiscuous culture. And so not only was it immodest, but people thought nothing of casually having relations with whoever they wanted, whenever they wanted, whether they were married or not. This was obviously an awkward situation, especially for a celibate like Father Brebeuf. Partly because other French traders, fur traders, had taken advantage, shall we say, of the Indian customs. They were surprised and thought Brebeuf was very weird when he didn't accept their hospitality in that regard. So that was different. Of course, heating in a Huron cabin isn't also great. You have to crouch very close to the fire in the winter, and as you know, Canada can get very, very cold. And then if you're not in a cabin, of course, you're exposed to the wind and cold. Food is not all that plentiful. Sometimes it runs short. So you have to be ready to deal with prolonged hunger. And then you just have the fact that you're living among a people whose language you don't know, and nobody you know knows the language either. It's not like you can pull out a phrase book and say, okay, this is how I ask where the bathroom is. Brebeuf had to figure it out all himself. Now, with all that said, the Hurons had some customs that were, shall we say, laudatory. One of them was they did have a very, very strong sense of hospitality. So when Brebeuf arrives, even though he's made no provisions for his own keep, for his housing, all he has to do is walk into a cabin. And sort of the immemorial custom is that if you go into their cabin, they will feed you and they will allow you to sleep there if you don't have someplace. As far as getting to know the Huron, again, because of this kind of custom of hospitality, Brebeuf was free to politely barge into anybody's cabin he wanted at any time and be welcome. And so therefore he was free to start mixing and mingling and befriending these people that he so longed to bring to Christ. Now, in the course of Brebeuf's missionary life of the Huron, we can divide it into a few periods. So the first period is between 1625 and 1629. This is his first time among the Huron. During this period, the Huron are fairly friendly to him. He's kind of a novelty at this point, and Brebeuf is still getting the language under his belt. He's not really fluent in it yet, and he has to rely fairly heavily on a young Huron who had gone back to France with the Recollets for some years to use as an interpreter. In 1629, Brebeuf is recalled first to Quebec to resolve the issue of famine there. He's asked to bring food with the Huron, and then repatriated to France by an attacking English ship in 1629. Quebec actually falls to the attack, and Brebeuf and the other Jesuits have to leave for 4 years. So it's kind of the first era. The next period goes between 1634 and 1641. Well, excuse me. The next period really is 1634 to 1636. This is when Brebeuf returns to the Huron mission. In his return, he's got a better rapport with the Hurons to start with, better command of the language. They're friendly to him. They've been waiting for him. Their last words to him when he left were, "Where are you going? What if someone dies? They will need to be baptized. Please come back." So it's back. Great. And he starts in earnest about trying to begin preaching the faith. What he does is he translates a popular dictionary, catechism, the Ledesma Catechism, into Huron. And he goes and starts chanting and reciting that. And little children are going around singing these little songs that they're both made that are really just the Ledesma Catechism translated into Huron. He focuses a lot on visiting the sick during this period. The Jesuit missionaries became wary of baptizing anybody too quickly. In the early missions, some of the Franciscans were very quick to baptize the natives they met as soon as possible. But what they found is that by baptizing them without prior instruction or evidence of conversion, they were falling back into their pagan practices in no time, not knowing better. It was causing scandal. It was causing more people to fall away from the practice of the faith and come into it. So the Jesuits refused to baptize anybody before they had good evidence of a real conversion, except for the dying. For the dying, of course, this is their last shot. So they focused on going to the sick and the dying, instructing them, baptizing them. Now, a happy consequence of this early on was many of the sick and dying that they baptized miraculously recovered. And for this reason, for a time, baptism had this kind of reputation as this catch-all cure to any disease. So the Huron were very, very anxious to have their children baptized and get themselves baptized, because they were convinced that automatically this would make them better. God in his providence sometimes knows what he's doing with these things. Brebeuf did try to explain to him that it was meant to heal the soul rather than to heal the body, but this really didn't bother the man. Now, meanwhile, Brebeuf, acting a little bit like a diplomat, begins making speeches about the faith at any possible occasion he can. The Huron were known for holding councils, and there was a particular kind of way in which these councils worked. There was an order. There was understood customs about which speaker seated to who, and how exactly you presented your oratory. So in 1636, Brebeuf gave a whole speech, basically preaching the faith in a nutshell, to the chiefs of the Bear Nation. So if you're ever wondering, like, gee, what would I say about the faith to someone who's never heard of God? Well, this is something you might say. So page 7. I told him that every man, as possessing an immortal soul, would at last, after this life, go to one or the other two places, paradise or hell, and that forever. But that these places were widely different, since paradise is a place of bounty and blessings of all kinds, and free from all manner of ills. Hell, a place where no blessing comes, and where ills of all kinds abound. That it is a fiery furnace, in the midst of which the damned will be forever tormented, and burn without ever being consumed. They must now consider to which of these two places they preferred to go someday, forever, and to do this while they were still in this life, because the matter was decided so far as it concerned all the dead for whom they had made or were going to make feasts. That all those who had slighted God and broken his commandments had followed the path to hell, where they now were tormented by punishments that could not be imagined, for which there was no remedy. I told them that if they wished to go to heaven, we would teach them the way, and inasmuch as all affairs of importance are managed here by presence, and as the porcelain that takes the place of gold and silver in this country is all powerful, I presented in this assembly a collar of 1,200 beads of porcelain, telling them that it was given to smooth the difficulties of the road to paradise. It is customary to employ such terms when they make presents to succeed in some difficult enterprise. Then all in turn, expressing their opinions, said that they dreaded those glowing fires of hell, and that they preferred the road to heaven. There was nevertheless one who, either seriously or more probably in jest, said it was very fine that all should wish to go to heaven and be happy, but that as far as he was concerned, it did not matter even if he should be burned in hell. I replied that God gave us all the choice of the one or the other, that he did not know what hellfire was, and that I hoped he would change his mind when he was better informed. So, in the beginning, there's the kernel of Brebeuf's preaching. In the end, you will face judgment. And you'll either go forever to heaven or forever to hell. And I can show you the way to heaven. And I want to. Just come listen to me and hear more. Now, this was a sort of curiosity for them at this point. They were intrigued. They were interested. Told that there was a hell, obviously none of them wanted to go there. However, over time, Brebeuf revealed exactly what it was the good God required of them to get to heaven. And many of those things cut against Huron customs. For instance, monogamy. You had to stay just with your wife. You couldn't go run around freely. And they thought this was inhuman. But likewise, many of their feasts and their cultural practices, they were pagan, and frankly, some of them seemed almost demonic. They couldn't call on demons anymore for help. That wouldn't do. And they couldn't put faith in dreams anymore the way they were used to. Right? Their practice of torturing their enemies had to be reined in, etc., etc. Now, at one point, when Brebeuf was explaining all these terms, he had just gotten one of the villages who agreed to build a house for the all-good God. And they all agreed and were zealous about it, thought this would be good. And then having said that, he laid down 6 conditions by which they needed to live if they were to please the good God. And the response of one of the natives of that tribe said, "My goodness, I thought God would be happy with that house. It seems he wants a heck of a lot more." So this brings us to our second period. This is a period of persecutions. In the course of the missionaries' stay among the Huron, there are waves of sickness that go through them. Now, from a modern perspective, we have a basic understanding that when the French crossed the Atlantic, they brought European disease with them for which Native Americans did not have a proper immune system. It went both ways. There were diseases that went from the New World back to the Old, for which the Europeans didn't have much of an immune system for either. But anyway, disease spread rapidly and in ways that the natives had never seen before. And this alarmed them. Now, at first they were consoled by the fact that the Jesuits were going cabin to cabin, caring for the sick, doting on them, and baptizing them. But in time, instead, they began to blame the Jesuits for the sickness. Now, a few things they observed. First of all, they observed that it seemed that the villages that got hit with illness worst were ones where the Jesuits lived. Again, from a modern perspective, we can put 2 and 2 together. Yes, where a European went, he would carry European germs. 2, they noticed that whoever the Jesuits baptized died. Now, this was deliberate on the Jesuits' part. They were only baptizing the dying for now, until they could find people who showed real signs of conversion. So, yes, most of the people they baptized were on their deathbed. But the natives put 2 and 2 together and concluded that baptism killed you, and that the Jesuits were going around murdering them. And then the accusations became wilder. They concluded that the Jesuits had put a curse on them, sent evil spirits to haunt them, and they had all kinds of reasons they believed that the Jesuits were doing this. One of the wild theories, this is a little later from this was in 1641, still on the same theme. There was a Frenchman named Robert Lecoq who had contracted smallpox. He was one of the first to come down with smallpox in Huronia. And he had it bad, and he was thought to be near death. the Hurons cooked up this story that Robert Lecoq, in his dying words, revealed to them that the Jesuits had cursed him and they had killed him with this sickness. And he loved the Hurons, Robert Lecoq did. And this is why he was revealing to them their secrets. And he told them that the Jesuits hid a toad in the corner of their cabin. It was from this toad that all the demons came. And then he died, according to the story. And the man's dying words must be taken very seriously. So the Huron went around and started rioting and trying to kill the Jesuits before eventually they found that Robert Lecoq, in fact, was not dead, but cured and living with the Jesuits. But far from putting their minds to rest, they scratched their head and said, this is very strange. Why would the Jesuits first curse him and give him the sickness, almost to kill him, only to cure him instead? We don't understand. They must be very great sorcerers to do that. So it was accusations like this that were floating around for those 5 years. They were wild, they were hysterical, and there was no appealing to reason. In the midst of this, there were a few occasions in which the Jesuits were almost killed. Many occasions, in fact, in which the Jesuits were almost killed. There was one day in which Brebeuf was in the village of Holy Martyrs, and some messengers came running to him, telling him that the warriors of the village of Brebeuf, where some other Jesuits were living, had left. And while they were gone, warriors of another village, of Tiamoste, intended to come in and slaughter them all. Come quick. So Brebeuf hurries there, gives emergency instructions to those at Holy Martyrs that if a general persecution breaks out, go to the home of this one believing Christian, bury your mass kit there, and hide as long as you can. So he gets to a Saucenet. He's summoned to a council and demanded to give an account of their responsibility for the sickness. And Brebeuf pleads as always that they have nothing to do with this. They're told that it's because they don't participate in the traditional rituals that are supposed to heal people, that the spirits are upset, and therefore the sickness continues. Brebeuf insists that these rituals are to no avail, and that only God can actually heal people. And if they really want them healed, to pray to God. They've heard this before, they've tried it before, it worked before, but they don't want to hear it. And they're pretty well set on killing them and tell them that they'll be dead tomorrow. Well, Brebeuf promises to make a novena of masses to St. Joseph. And he begins the masses that night. The next day comes, and they're supposed to be dead. No one does anything. He goes about his business as usual. Second day comes, he walks stoically around the village, goes about his business as usual. No one lays their hands on him. And after that, I figured things had just kind of petered out. There were a few consequences from that event. One, Brebeuf actually had a dream, a series of dreams that were like this, in which he saw that there were demons who were trying to attack him, trying to have him killed. And that they were only allowed to torment him so long as God permitted it. And every time they tried to take a swing at him to kill him, God pulled him back. Now, the second thing, in the wake of this, Brebeuf resolved to take a vow never to refuse martyrdom if an occasion offered itself. I'll give you the text here. Page 11. Jesus, my Lord and Savior, what can I give you in return for all the favors you have first conferred on me? I will take from your hand the cup of your sufferings and call on your name. I vow before your eternal Father and the Holy Spirit, before your most holy Mother and her most chaste spouse, before the angels, apostles, and martyrs, before my blessed fathers, St. Ignatius and St. Francis Xavier. In truth, I vow to you, Jesus, my Savior, that as far as I have the strength, I will never fail to accept the grace of martyrdom. If someday you in your infinite mercy should offer it to me, your most unworthy servant. I bind myself in this way so that for the rest of my life I will have neither permission nor freedom to refuse opportunities of dying and shedding my blood for you. unless at a particular juncture I should consider it more suitable for your glory to act otherwise at that time. Now, at that point, Brebeuf was locked in. The mood of the Huron can swing wildly up and down from day to day, depending on the circumstances and depending on how the rumors are going. But with this vow, Brebeuf is resolved to ride it out, come what may. If they threaten his life, so be it. He's promised it to Jesus Christ, and therefore is prepared to give it. And that's all. If he survives from the next day, praise God. Clearly it was for God's greater glory. And if he doesn't, praise God. And it's done for the greater glory. It gives Brebeuf a kind of freedom for the rest of the mission to face very, very great risks and dangers. Now, the strength of the persecution that the missionaries faced would give you the impression that there was no fruit from it. But in the thick of this darkness, in the thick of all these calamities and calumnies, there were wonderful conversions. Now, the most notable of them was of Joseph Chiatanois. Joseph Chiatanois had heard Brebeuf speak before, and Brebeuf's preaching had actually really pierced him to the heart. He wanted to be baptized and go to heaven. And he began praying on his own accord without any instructions from Brebeuf. Now, Chiatanois fell deathly ill. And on August 11th, 1638, he calls for Brebeuf and the Jesuits. And he asks for baptism. Now, because he's dying, the Jesuits do baptize him, but meanwhile, they see deep faith in this man, and they begin a novena to St. Joseph for his healing. August 18th, he's miraculously healed. And thereafter dedicates his life to God who healed him. He becomes a great apostle among the Huron. Brebeuf, as he tries to preach to Ososune, where Joseph Chiatanois is from, has Joseph Chiatanois there to explain to him how to phrase things in a way that will make sense to the Huron mind. At midnight Mass, one Christmas, the Jesuits do a beautiful, high ceremony midnight Mass among the Huron. And Joseph Chiatanois is there to explain it to them. He says, "Ah, my brothers, what do these lights shining and sparkling in the midst of the night mean, if not that he whose memory we are now honoring has through his birth so dissipated the shadows and the ignorance of the world? Having done this the first time so many centuries ago, he is about to grant us today for the first time in these countries the same grace and mercy." This is from a Huron who became Catholic less than a year before this. He becomes their great defender, and through his prayers and intercessions and preaching, many Huron come to the faith. There are other just odd times where the Jesuits would meet somebody who would call for them and find that grace had been working in their lives in ways that they never could have imagined and never would have accepted under the circumstances. And in those times they give thanks to God that they had shown up to be able to help these souls on the way to heaven. Now, in time, the tide would turn. So, through 1641, it's a lot of ups and downs with disease, and with all the rumors that the Jesuits are the ones who are causing it. But as the disease simmers down, the converts increase, and their fervor increases. By the time we get to the period like 1642 to 1649, yes, sometimes the Jesuits are accused of causing diseases, but now they're not defending themselves anymore. Now the Christian Huron are defending them too. A major turning point came when there was a 22-year-old man named Jacques Duart who was murdered by one of the Huron hosts of the French. Now, when the Jesuits first arrived in Huronia, a murder like that would have been politely overlooked. No one would have said anything and would have been taken as a real threat to the Jesuits. But by the time we get to, I believe this is in 1645, the Christian Huron will have none of it. And they demand a council be called, in which this would be discussed, and they would demand reparations be made for this murder against an innocent Frenchman. In this council, the Christian Huron chiefs carried the council. And ever thereafter, Huronia was a Christian country. The faith dominated it from there on out. The pagans no longer did. Now, just a little bit back to Brebeuf. Brebeuf spends a few years away from the mission. What happened was in 1641, he was spending the winter among the Neutral Nation, which borders the Huron Nation. And on his return in March back to Huronia, he slipped on the ice and broke his collarbone. His collarbone never quite healed. And so therefore he was in great pain, and his superior, Father Jerome Lalemant, ordered him back to Quebec to go and rest him. So for 3 years, 1641 to 1644, Brebeuf is first in Quebec in a little mission called the Mission of St. Joseph at Sillery. And there he ran a school for Hurons who wished to come to the faith. Sillery was an interesting project. What it was a place where Native Americans, predominantly Algonquin, who had become Catholic could go and live among other Catholics. Only those who were fervently practicing the faith were allowed in there. So if you weren't baptized or intending to be baptized, you weren't allowed to live there. So the issue is that there was no one in Sillery who spoke Huron. So for those few years, Brebeuf was the leader of, shall we say, the Huron school. And through that, he brought 4 young Huron braves into the faith, into the church. He also spent a year in 3 Rivers, which in theory was supposed to be a different assignment, but effectively the Huron braves sought him out and he wanted the 6 new students again. Likewise to teach and instruct and baptize. They were very zealous. At one point they went to Sillery and were offered to go hunting with the other Algonquin. And in response of these new Christian Huron were to say, I didn't come here to hunt. I came here to learn about God and the way to heaven. I'll spend my time in that. So, Brebeuf's real desire was, of course, to return to Huronia, where he had labored for most of his life now. So despite the collarbone, in 1644 he was sent back and spent the last 5 years of his life there. So now we come to the end of Brebeuf's life and the end of the mission. In the 1640s, war with the Iroquois started to heat up. We call these the Beaver Wars. The Iroquois was seeking to get a monopoly on the beaver trade and intending to wipe the Huron and Algonquin out and root. Because the French were allied with the Huron and Algonquin, this put the French at odds with the Iroquois as well. They terrorized the St. Lawrence River and terrorized the villages near Huronia. Now in 1648, the first of the missionaries is killed by the Iroquois, and that's Father Antoine Daniel. While he's in his village, which is kind of a far outpost from the other villages in Huronia, he is saying Mass, and suddenly they hear war whoops, and the Iroquois are there. He runs through cabins, baptizing sick people, absolving anyone he can find who passes by. He goes back to the church. All sorts of Huron had gathered in the church waiting for general absolution. He absolves them. And Father Daniel, while he's watching these faithful he loves try to escape, he sees that they need time bought for them. And so what he does is he charges out of his chapel with the crucifix held high and faces down the Iroquois, which distracts them just long enough to give many of the Huron time to escape. The Iroquois shoot Father Daniel through the heart with a musket, and they tear his heart out and they eat it. So he's the first of the martyrs.
The rest of the Jesuits know that this danger remains. The Iroquois are making further inroads, and they could attack at any time. As a consequence of this, one of the villages decides to rebuild, and to rebuild in the form of a citadel. The citadel is renamed St. Ignace, after St. Ignatius. And it would have been really quite imposing. The issue is that it was not manned when it needed to be. Many of the men and the braves had either gone out hunting, trading, or were looking for Iroquois. And therefore, it was mostly women and children left there in March 1649. St. Ignace was one of the villages that Father Brebeuf and Father Lalemant had care for. So, while they were at a neighboring village, St. Louis, 3 Hurons came running from St. Ignace. They were naked, they were out of breath, and they were scared. They reported that the Iroquois had attacked St. Ignace and were slaughtering everybody. Brebeuf and Lalemant knew it was only a matter of time before they came to St. Louis. Now, Brebeuf tells Father Lalemant that there's no point in both of them dying, that he was free to leave and go take refuge at Sainte Marie. But Father Lalemant refused. So the two of them stay with the terrified Huron who cannot escape. And they, like Father Daniel, go through baptizing those who are not baptized, absolving those who need absolution. When the Iroquois attack, they stay with the warriors who are up on the palisades trying to fire back at the Iroquois. As they fall off the palisades, they're there to give them the sacraments as they die. Now, very quickly, palisades are breached and taken. Father Brebeuf, Father Lalemant, and the other Huron are dragged to St. Ignace. And in St. Ignace, the Iroquois have prepared essentially a torture chamber in the main cabin that was meant to be the church. They've lit fires near the posts holding up the cabin. Father Brebeuf, at noon on March 16th, 1649, is tied to one of those posts. He kisses and embraces it before being tied up to it. In native custom, the expectation is that you show defiance to your enemy as he torments you. That if you show weakness or any sign of pain, this is dishonorable and cowardly. So, the goal of the Iroquois is, of course, to make him at least wince, to cry out. But through all their tortures, Brebeuf shows no reaction to them at all at first. They stick burning sticks underneath his feet. He doesn't wince. They stuff torches against his skin. He doesn't notice. They scream at him. He doesn't hear. From what the Huron could see, it looked like Father Brebeuf was just totally entranced in God through all of that. Now, eventually, Father Brebeuf does come to. And when he does, he addresses the Huron faithful in Father Lalemant. Let's see here. My sons, my brothers, let us lift up our eyes to heaven in our afflictions. Let us remember that God is the witness of our sufferings, that very soon he will be our exceedingly great reward. Let us die in our faith. Let us hope from him the fulfillment of his promises to us. I have more pity for you than I have for myself. Bear up with courage under the few remaining torments. The sufferings will end with our lives. The grandeur which follows them will then never have an end. And then Brebeuf calls out, Jésus, pitié. Jesus, have mercy on us. And the Huron respond, Jesus, mercy. The Iroquois are not impressed with his preaching, and they stuff a burning torch into his face and into his mouth. Father Brebeuf spits the burning coals at it, and exhorts them to believe in God, whom they rejected. They burn and slash him more. Still Father Brebeuf cries out, Jesus, mercy. They fasten a collar with red-hot hatchets on each side of it, so that no matter where he stands, the hatchets burn into his skin. Still, he says, Jesus, mercy. They fashion a belt of resinous bark. While he waits, he watches the belt be fashioned. He exhorts Father Lalemant and believers to keep the faith, To pray as they suffered and to endure also as to win the victory. And then as they light him on fire, even though he's a living torch, choking through the smoke, he reminds them that these fires, though great, are feeble compared to the fires of hell. And though this flame consumes the body for a time, the fires of hell will consume the soul forever. Now, one of the Iroquois who was torturing him was a former Huron. And so he's familiar with the preaching of Brebeuf. And so he mocks him. He says, "My brother, you were such a good friend to us. You always told us that we must be baptized in order to get to heaven. You just wanted to get us to heaven after we died. Well, let us return the favor." And he has boiling water poured over Brebeuf. 3 times in mock of baptism. He tells him that he should thank him for getting into heaven. Still, Brebeuf prays for their conversion and prays that God might have mercy on them and lead them to him through baptism. And the Huron believers respond in kind. And now the Iroquois have heard enough. They slash Brebeuf's nose off. He still endeavors to talk. They slash his upper and lower lip off. Finally, they cut his tongue out and force a firebrand into his mouth. And one last effort, Brebeuf lets out a guttural, "Yesu texture." Now, he can no longer talk because his jaws are locked, and he can look at them. They don't like the look. They gouge his eyes out. They drag him outside to the platform in view of the sun to offer to their son got rescued. There they scalp him, they hack his feet off, and they pull his heart out and they eat it. Brebeuf entered heaven at 4 p.m. on Tuesday, March 16th, 1649, just 9 days before his 59th birthday. Father Lalemant would suffer in very similar fashion, but for 15 hours, immediately after Father Brebeuf dies. In the wake of the attack, some Christian Huron did escape and made to Sainte Marie, which is sort of the center of missionary efforts in Huronia. He recounts what happened to Father Brebeuf and Father Lalemant and how they died. And he leads them back, and they're able to recover the bodies of these 2 faithful missionaries. They bury them in the Indian chapel in Sainte Marie. This essentially marks the end of the Huron mission, though. It's no longer safe to live in the villages they once did. 15 villages are abandoned in the year after Brebeuf and Lalemant are killed. All the Huron cluster on what's now known as Christian Island at the mission of St. Joseph. They're afraid to be on the mainland for fear of attack. But on the island, they have not planted sufficient crops. And they endure great famine and starvation. The Iroquois don't simply attack the Huron, they begin attacking the Huron neighbors, where many of the Huron have taken refuge. It's in those attacks in Platoon that Father Charles Garnier and Father Noel Chabanel are killed. In the end, there's no rescue in Huronia. The Christian Huron pack everything up, and with the few missionaries who are left, they leave and go and live with them in Quebec. In some ways, it's a tragic story. But in other words, it's a deeply moving story. These missionaries sacrificed everything they had. See, the people whom they had never heard of might know Jesus Christ in His grace and His mercy and might reach heaven. They constantly put their lives on the line to hold out these graces to people who didn't understand them and sometimes they didn't want them. And repeatedly, they may have thought that it was all for naught. But in the end, the seeds did take root. It became a Christian nation, a nation of believers, and not any sort of believers, but fervent ones ready to die for the faith. I've probably told you before, but it is notable. The vast majority of American Indians are Catholic. And they are Catholic because of missionaries like Father Brebeuf, Lalemant, and companions. There's a story more relevant to tomorrow, but worth knowing. One of the missionaries in Huron was Father Francois Bersani, or Francesco actually. And he'd been abducted by the Iroquois and tortured. And his hands, when he came back to the Huron missions, were deeply mangled. And this left an impression on the Huron. They do believe there must be a heaven. There must be a God. This man would not have endured all of this if there wasn't. And as one of the other missionaries quoted, Father Bersani's hands preached far, far better than his lips ever could. I'd encourage that we should be as zealous, as ready to make sacrifices, as ready to turn love for Jesus Christ for the love that he has shown us as they were, to be as bold as they were and plain as they were. There are as many souls in our society who do not know Jesus Christ and are not on the way to heaven and do not know the way. And we should teach them, even when they don't want to hear it, even when it means we get rejected. Someone needs to say something. So that's what I have for you on Father Brebeuf. Does anybody have any questions? George?
Just looking at the image here, the drawing or the painting, but is Brebeuf in the center? I know he's tall, he's big.
Yeah.
Do you know which one he is?
Yes. So take a look at the front cover of the booklet for a moment. So the picture that you'll see most, or as I see most frequently, of the North American martyrs is the one in color on the front of the booklet. And in that one, Brebeuf is in the center. You can see he's big, he's bald, he's older than the others, and very prominent. I believe it's Father Râle next, to his right. Father Jogues to his left. You can see Jogues always has missing fingers. Next to Jogues in the surplice is Father Daniel, because he was in the middle of saying Mass when attacked. Kneeling underneath is René Goupil, dressed in the Jesuit habit, since Jogues received his vows while in the Mohawk country. Going the opposite side, if you look at the man in buckskin, that's John Lalonde, who's a layman who worked with Jogues. With the palm branch, it's Noel Chabanel. Above Noel Chabanel is Father Charles Garnier, who died with him, and then Father Gabriel Lallemont, who died with Brebeuf. So that's the picture I'm used to seeing. Ours is different. The central figure in the one we have at Holy Martyrs Church is St. Isaac Jogues. Now, this is classic American pride. Because Brebeuf died, of course, in Canada. But Jogues died in upstate New York. So Jogues is featured as the prominent one in our picture. You can tell again from the fingers. Yeah. To that note, so we don't have, so that right now this image hangs the front of the Church of Holy Martyrs. We are working at getting something a little bit larger to fit the space. So if anybody would like to help with that, I'm guessing what we're looking at would be like $250 in total. So within range. But anyway. Any other questions?
What did you say the original name of Holy Martyrs is, or the rest of it?
Yeah, so the full name is the Holy Martyrs of North America. Yep.
Is there any way of bringing that back to the forefront, like start using it again? Because it's beautiful.
I highly encourage you to use it. The issue is, in common parlance, it's just, it's a mouthful. It's kind of a similar thing that's happening. Father Cartwright really wants us to start saying St. Gregory the Great here. And I sympathize, because it identifies which St. Gregory, and it's a nice honorific, but I'm lazy. So, no, I think it's a fair point. At least in writing, it would be a good idea.
Yeah, I think just put it on a few, I don't know, just a few advertisements. You're advertising something happening at Holy Martyrs. Yeah, just put it out there so people at least know that it exists.
Yeah.
And then maybe it will catch on.
Yep.
But the other thing is what you said, while you were talking, I really agree with you that we're surrounded by pagans, like the Indians. And they are so cruel towards the church and so unaware of, and I think we're too past it. Like we just say, well, let live and let live, or people say that's your opinion, and it's even our loved ones. Our loved ones are on their way to hell, like literally. And you think about what they were willing to do, I feel very lazy.
Yeah.
That I'm just, not pushing that, because it really is right within our own families, our next door neighbor, our children,
Yeah.
It's serious.
No, to your point, Marie, it's true. A lot of some of the people we know say that it's more that they're in heresy, where they know the faith, but they've got just a warped understanding of it, maybe a little hostility to it. But increasingly, more and more people are in a position of where the Hurons were, where they know nothing about the faith. They don't even have anything to start with. And so we're getting to the point we just can't take anything for granted. If you don't say it, you really have to assume they've never heard it. Well, we should probably wrap up for today. Just a note here. Relics were only recovered of 3 out of the 8 martyrs. And we have them here. So the first class relics we have are Father Brebeuf, Father Gabriel Lallemont, and Father Charles Garnier. And so there's bone fragment of each of them in this reliquary here. So after the talk, if you would like to pray before the relics, I highly encourage you to. You're welcome to make a sign of the cross with the reliquary. You're welcome to kiss it. If you do kiss it, there's a little purificator there just to wipe the place where you kiss. So tomorrow we'll talk about St. Isaac Jogues.